Some meetings don't begin with reason, but with the sudden collision of two unsteady heartbeats in a moment of chaos. She, a bridesmaid running late, clumsy and out of place among the polished crowd. He, a man who seemed to have everything yet lacked the one thing that allows life to truly begin, someone to believe in. And between the music swelling the glitter of crystal lights and half-finished sentences, they saw each other. Not with their eyes, but with all the unspoken things they had never dared to give voice to. Lucille Winters had never been the sort of woman to arrive late, certainly not for something as important as her best friend's wedding. Yet here she was, dashing across the hotel car park, silently cursing the 10-centimeter heels, slowly killing her dignity and both her feet. Her midnight blue silk dress gathered in restless waves around her knees. Strands of hair had already broken free from her low bun, clinging rebelliously to her neck. She should have been composed, serene, smiling gently at the bride. Instead, she was breathless, lightly damp with sweat, and uncertain she had enough air left to even attempt a smile. A few hours earlier, everything had been fine. She'd left home early, triple-checked her bag, dress shoes, wedding gift, all accounted for, and even imagined arriving in time to help Evelyn adjust her veil. But then the car she'd booked canceled at the last minute. A taxi nearly knocked her flat outside the hotel, and the lift, packed of course. So, she'd run up 5 flights of stairs, muttering under her breath, "Just don't break a heel. Please God, anything but that." And then, bam! Lucille collided with someone. Everything scattered in cinematic slow motion, the bouquet tumbling from her arms, her clutch hitting the marble floor, the heel of her shoe snagging in the folds of her gown. She pitched forward, bracing for impact. But before her face could acquaint itself with polished stone, an arm, firm, steady, curved around her waist, pulling her back with the grace of a dance partner, saving his partner from a fall. A scent drifted over her, dark, expensive, impossibly masculine. For a heartbeat, Lucille forgot her own name. "Please tell me I didn't just knock down an old man," she muttered, struggling to steady herself. "Not quite an old man," came the reply, low and deep, vibrating somewhere in her chest. She looked up and nearly lost her breath again. The man before her looked as though he'd stepped straight out of a glossy magazine spread. Dark brown hair swept perfectly back, steel-gray eyes that seemed to hold tides within them, a black tailored suit cut to his tall, powerful frame, and an expression, oh God, half curious, half amused. "You're late," he said, lips curving faintly. "Thank you, detective. Anything else startlingly obvious you'd like to announce?" She shot back, her tone sharper with embarrassment than annoyance. She tried to wrench her foot free, desperate to flee toward the ballroom, but her heel was still caught fast in silk. Perfect. As if colliding with a beautiful stranger wasn't humiliating enough, now she was flailing like a fish caught in a net. He crouched, slowly, unhurried, and with one deft movement he freed her shoe. "There," he said, "you're free to continue your death-defying mission." Her cheeks burned crimson. "Thanks," she murmured, scooping up her clutch, smoothing her dress, and hurrying away without daring to look back. But his voice lingered warm and low, threading through her thoughts. "Don't look back, Lucille. Don't look back." She slipped into the bridesmaids' row just as the opening notes of the music began. Evelyn shot her a glare sharp enough to kill, but what made it impossible to breathe wasn't her best friend's fury. It was a gaze from across the room, the gaze of the man she had nearly toppled. "Who is that?" she whispered to the bridesmaid beside her. Bo Donovan, came the reply. "Chairman of Donovan Capital, one of the wealthiest men in the country. Rumor has it he can bring down a company with a single phone call." Lucille swallowed hard. Wonderful. She'd just spilled her entire life across a man who could buy this hotel and demolish it, just for the quiet pleasure of a cup of tea. And he was still watching her. Again. As though she were something unexpected, a puzzle he hadn't yet learned how to solve. Lucille turned away, forcing her breathing steady. But her heart had no intention of obeying. One thing she knew for certain tonight would not pass quietly. Lucille had never been the kind of woman to unravel under a single glance. Yet, from the moment she stepped into the aisle where crystal light danced across ivory petals drifting softly to the floor, she felt it, that gaze. Bo Donovan's eyes fastening to her like an invisible ribbon, delicate yet impossible to untie. She tried not to turn back, tried to fix her attention on the gentle swell of music on the bride's trembling voice, as vows were spoken on the kind of beauty that should have left her moved to tears. But the only thing her heart beat wildly for was the sharp awareness of being watched. "You've been tucking your hair behind your ear for the last 5 minutes," whispered Lily. Another bridesmaid lips pressed tight to keep from breaking the solemnity. Lucille dropped her hand cheeks burning. "I haven't." "You have, and the good news, he's still looking at you." Lucille swallowed hard. Oh God. She didn't dare ask who. She knew. Bo Donovan, the name itself a proclamation. Wealthy, remote, untouchable. The financial magazines called him a moving wall of ice, a man who connected to nothing and no one without strategic cause. So, why was he watching her, a forgettable architect with tangled hair and a wrinkled gown? Maybe Lily murmured he likes things he can't predict. Or Lucille muttered back, he's deciding whether I should be thrown out for spilling wine on his suit. The reception unfolded beneath star-soft lighting, champagne flutes clinking like shy bells, the faintest hint of vanilla wafting from the cake. Lucille buried herself in duties, straightening Evelyn's gown, cross-checking the menu, anything to avoid colliding with him. But the universe, it seemed, was fluent in mischief. When she spun suddenly to grab a glass of wine from a passing tray, she struck something solid again. Dark liquid arced through the air, falling like petals in slow motion, before blooming against the black of his shirt. Lucille froze glass limp in her hand. The world held its breath. "Please don't tell me this is," she whispered. "Yes," Bo said, glancing at the stain, then back at her. "It's real." "Oh God," she exhaled. "I'll get napkins, I'll—" "Relax." He slipped off his jacket, rolling up his sleeves with a deliberate ease. "It's only wine." Lucille blinked. "You're not going to sue me?" "Not yet." His lips tugged faintly. "But if you'd like to make amends, you can join me at the bar." "What?" she blurted. "Not a date," he said, voice as calm as if discussing the weather. "Just curious what you'd order." She darted a glance around, desperate for an excuse to refuse. None came. And if she was honest, she didn't want one. "Fine," she said, "but I'm choosing the drink." "Surprise me," he replied, eyes catching light, carrying something dangerously close to hope. The bar glowed amber over marble stone, a quiet pocket of air that felt worlds apart from the party. Lucille perched on a high stool, arms folded. "I should order the most expensive thing, just to watch your reaction." Bo tilted his head. "You think I care about the price?" "Exactly why it would be fun." His laugh was low-rich, and it traveled right through her like a shiver. "2 whiskeys," she told the bartender. Bo raised a brow. "Impressive?" "I'm not the pink cocktail type," she said, half playful, half earnest. "No," he agreed, eyes lingering on her, as though they read more than her words. "You're the type who enjoys surprising people." Her lips pressed together, hand tightening around the glass. She refused to admit he was right. So she asked, "What's a silent, ice-cold CEO doing at a noisy wedding like this?" "Best man," he said, swirling the amber liquid. "And because black tie galas bore me to death. And I'm a bridesmaid by duty, not preference. Though, I suppose things have been more interesting since I drenched the guest of honor in wine." Bo smiled. "I won't be forgetting that anytime soon." Silence followed, but not the awkward kind. The silence with rhythm, as if the air itself had a heartbeat. Lucille stared down at her glass. "Earlier, you looked at me like you were analyzing something." "I only do that when there's a reason," he said, gaze unwavering. Her pulse tripped, her breath uneven. "Do you always do this?" she asked softly. "Make it impossible for people to breathe." "Only," he said, "when they're someone I want to understand." And in that fragile instant, Lucille knew not all collisions were accidents. Some were fate, slow, strange, undeniable. The wedding continued like a classical score, each note layering into memories yet to be born. But for Lucille, the music had become nothing more than background to a conversation unfinished, a gaze not yet withdrawn, a glass of whiskey left waiting. She stood among the bridesmaids, champagne in hand, eyes wandering, never intentional, yet never able to escape. The figure of Bo Donovan. He leaned lightly against the balcony rail, his eyes still and fathomless like a sea awaiting storm. "You know he's still watching you, don't you?" Evelyn murmured, her mischief shining the way it always did. Lucille turned, pretending to study the flower arrangements. "No one is watching anyone. Everyone's watching the bride, as they should." Evelyn teased. Except for the one who hasn't looked away from you since you walked in. And no, I don't mean the groom. Lucille laughed softly. You're imagining things. No, you're blushing. Her grip tightened around her glass, as though she could steady her pulse with the stem of crystal. He's someone who'll disappear after tonight. And I'll still be a very ordinary architect with a very crowded diary. Evelyn tilted her head, her eyes a mix of tenderness and play. Lucille, sometimes destiny doesn't care about your diary. She slipped out of the reception hall, unsure if she was searching for quiet or simply for her own heartbeat again. But then came the sound of footsteps closing the space behind her. How long, he asked, are you planning to keep pretending you're not looking at me? Lucille closed her eyes for a second before turning slowly. Beau was there. No half smile now, no game of riddles. Just a calm so deliberate it felt like he'd rehearsed his next words 100 times. I wasn't looking at you, she replied, her voice barely more than air. You're a terrible liar, he said, lips curving not in jest, but in the kind of smile that comes when a burden is unexpectedly lifted. Lucille folded her arms. Do you always approach people this way, as if they're puzzles waiting to be solved? Only when I think the answer might be worth it. She lifted her chin, fighting the betrayal of her eyes. But his, those stormy gray-blue eyes, carried a force she couldn't resist. She had met polished men before. None of them like Beau Donovan. He didn't seek the light. The light sought him. And I'm a puzzle, she asked, stubbornness edging her tone. No, he stepped closer. You're the question I never thought to ask, but now can't stop thinking about. Her breath caught her chest trembling. Dance with me, he said. What she blurted. Just one dance. Give me a reason to understand why you've thrown me so off course. She glanced toward the dance floor. Couples swayed gently to a soft ballad. Everything looked perfect. Everything except her. She had no reason to agree and no reason to refuse. And if I say no, then I'll believe you're lying. Again, a helpless laugh slipped from her lips. He had a way of turning every denial into a confession. She didn't know what this was, play weakness or something larger. But when he extended his hand waiting, she no longer wanted a reason. She placed her hand in his, and for a single suspended moment, the world stopped turning. They moved onto the dance floor as though they had always belonged there. For the first few seconds, neither spoke. There was only the rhythm of steps, the echo of breath, the music soft as the first rain of spring. Have you danced before? She asked, half curious, half hoping he'd say no. Yes, he said, but never with someone who made me forget I was dancing. Lucille looked up, meeting his eyes. So close she felt the warmth of his breath against her hairline. Why do I make you lose your way? She whispered. Beau didn't answer at once. He twirled her gently, then leaned close, voice low, a secret resting against her heart. Because you make me want to start over, with everything. Lucille stilled, partly because of his words, partly because they were the very words echoing in her own chest. The song ended, yet neither moved, reluctant to break the fragile tether between them. Thank you for the dance, she said. Thank you for not running away, he replied. She smiled. Stepping back, though, her heartbeat remained in his keeping. Lucille turned away, but she knew this wasn't the end. And Beau, he stood watching her still, as if he'd just found something he hadn't known he'd been searching for all his life. That night, even the stars seemed to know how to keep silent. Lucille slipped out of the reception, leaving behind the ripple of laughter and the clink of crystal, her mind floating in a haze as light as mist. She wasn't drunk, only not quite sober in the way one should be. She walked slowly toward the hotel's front steps, drawing her thin shawl closer around her shoulders. The night air was crisp, though her heart hadn't decided whether it was burning or frozen. She pulled out her phone, opened the car-hailing app. The screen flashed back its cold verdict. No drivers available. Perfect. The evening would end with her stranded at a hotel in a ball gown, alone with no one left to call. Evelyn was lost to newlywed bliss. The other bridesmaids had vanished into the night, some in the arms of nameless men in tuxedos. She considered waiting in the lobby until morning, if she had to. But then, footsteps echoed behind her on the tiled floor. Steady, familiar, too familiar. Looks like your escape plan failed. She turned. Her instincts had been right. Beau Donovan stood there, hands in his pockets, his black suit now stripped of its jacket, white shirt rolled to the elbows. In the slant of the streetlight, he no longer looked like the CEO of a financial empire. He looked like something else entirely, something that made you forget where you were, even who you were. I wasn't escaping, she said, folding her arms. I was going home. No car. Minor detail. I have one, he replied. Lucille let out a soft laugh. Not because it was funny, but because the situation was absurd. You're offering me a lift, not offering doing. You always decide this quickly, only when I'm certain it's worth it. The words firm and simple stilled her. She met his gaze. This time, instead of looking away, she nodded. Beau's car glided through the night streets quiet, as if the wind itself carried it. For the first few minutes, neither spoke. Outside, the city blurred into shadows and light. Inside, silence stretched nameless, but not empty. Lucille toyed with her fingers. You always drive yourself. At night, yes. Helps me think. She turned, studying him. So you do think. He cast her a sideways look. You assumed I didn't. I assumed you were an enigma. His smile came quickly, lightly, like a breeze rippling over water. And you enjoy solving enigmas. No, I prefer avoiding them. Silence again. Then his voice lower. Do you know you make people notice you? She blinked. Is that your way of saying I'm a nuisance? No, he said. It's my way of saying you're remarkable. Her heart stumbled. But before she could find words, the car slowed, stopping before her apartment building. Headlights cast their silhouettes long and thin across the pavement like secrets not yet spoken aloud. Thank you for bringing me home, she said, reaching for the door. Lucille. She turned back. Beau was watching her, and in that look, there was none of the man who commanded million-dollar deals. Only a strange, quiet sincerity. You make me want to understand more about the world, and about myself. Lucille said nothing. She only stood there wrapped in the soft breath of night. And then, for reasons she couldn't name, she smiled. Not the smile that ends an evening. The smile that begins something unnamed. She stepped out. It was only once she reached the lift, catching her reflection in the mirrored doors, that she whispered to herself, Lucille, this is not simple anymore. The next morning, the sky was a long stretch of ash gray outside the office windows. Lucille carried her coffee into the meeting room, clinging to the faint hope that today would be nothing more than floor plans and technical drawings. Until she looked up, and her heart tripped. At the head of the table, composed unmistakable eyes meeting hers, sat Beau Donovan. She nearly spilled her coffee. No, it can't be. He looked up at that precise moment. Their gazes locked, and once again the world forgot to turn. Good morning, Miss Winters, he said, his voice even as though they had shared nothing but a handshake. She blinked, struggling to mask her shock. Our lead investor, her director, cut in cheerfully. Beau and his company finalized the Richmond Tower deal just last week. Lucille felt the air drain from her lungs. Beau only watched her. No explanations, no private signals. Just the same gaze. The one that chilled her skin and burned her heart all at once. And in that instant, she realized fate doesn't always knock politely. Sometimes it drives you home. And the very next morning, it sits waiting for you in the boardroom. There are mornings when you step into the office with a hot cup of coffee expecting a quiet day. And then there are mornings like this one, when the man who has already stolen the rhythm of your heart sits at the head of the boardroom table, as though destiny has dealt a hand nobody asked for. Lucille tried to steady herself. She set her coffee down, pulled out a chair, aware of every curious glance from her colleagues, none of whom had the faintest idea that her heart had just lost its steady beat. Beau Donovan sat less than 3 meters away. The same immaculate suit, the same impenetrable calm, the same public mask of the CEO who graced financial headlines. Except for one difference. He was looking at her, not out of courtesy, not out of curiosity, but with the kind of look that already knew. Lucille dropped her gaze to the Richmond Tower file. The company's largest commission to date. The project that could shape her career. And now, its principal investor was the man who had once held her beneath amber light, whispering that she made him want to begin again. Perfect. What could possibly be worse? After the meeting, she almost fled, swallowing down everything she couldn't say. But his voice followed her, soft as an autumn breeze. Lucille. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, then turned. Yes, Mr. Donovan. She stressed the surname, a line drawn in the sand. He didn't step over it. He erased it. Beau leaned lightly against the wall, arms folded, his gaze weighing her silence. No warmer greeting than that, he asked. We're at work, she replied briskly. Of course. Work. He nodded as though trying to convince himself. So, you're going to pretend nothing happened. Her arms folded tighter, hiding the tremor in her hands. Nothing did happen. It was just a dance. And a night, and an invitation, and a silence so long it lasted into this morning. She gave a brittle laugh. You're so used to controlling everything that silence unnerves you. No? His voice deepened. I'm not used to wanting someone to understand me and watching them turn away. The words, unguarded, unshielded, stopped her cold. Bo stepped a little closer, but not enough to trap her. We'll be working together for months. I don't want a fracture in this. Lucille nodded. Then don't bring up that night again. A pause. Then softly, you think I could forget? She didn't answer, because she hadn't. That afternoon, the office hummed with keystrokes and the faint smell of burnt coffee. Lucille tried to bury herself in drawings and budgets, but every time Bo walked past, the air thickened as though a storm waited just beyond the windows. By evening, he appeared at her desk. I want to discuss the glass facade. Are you free tonight? We can talk in the restaurant, she said quickly. In here, you'll just keep avoiding my eyes, he said easily as though pointing out a flaw in a design sketch. She gripped her pen. If I agree, it's strictly work, nothing else. Deal, he smiled. But I choose the restaurant. It wasn't a glittering dining hall. No linen-draped tables or French menus. Just a small eatery tucked down a lamplit lane with wooden tables, floral cloths, and jazz spilling softly from an old speaker in the corner. You chose this? She asked, surprised. I'm not always the Bo Donovan from the press conferences, he said, pouring her water. Lucille didn't know how to reply. The place was warm, real the kind of setting that dissolved armor, which made it far more dangerous than champagne and chandeliers. They spoke of the project, of glass and steel and budgets. But threaded between each word was something larger, a genuine listening and unspoken gentleness. And for the first time in days, Lucille didn't feel lost inside herself. When they left, the city was dressed in twilight blue. Neither spoke, neither needed to. At her doorstep, she finally paused. You're not the kind of man who backs away easily, are you? When it's something I want, I don't back away, Bo said simply. She looked at him, and for the first time his eyes held no coldness. Only truth. She opened the door, then hesitated. Good night, Mr. Donovan. Good night, Lucille. The door closed, but inside her, another door had just quietly opened. Some mornings, Lucille woke feeling like a carefully wound clock. Precise, purposeful, always on time. This was not one of those mornings. She woke with the sense that someone had nudged her heartbeat slightly off key. Not painful, just not quite right anymore. She moved through her rituals, brewing coffee, opening her laptop, checking drawings, brushing on light makeup. But when she stepped into Horizon's office, the sunlight pouring through the tall windows wasn't enough to quiet the unease humming softly in her chest. Bo Donovan was already there. Always there. As if he didn't need sleep, or as if he slept at the desk, only to rise the moment she walked in. Good morning, he said, eyes fixed on the file in his hands. Morning, she replied quickly, slipping past to her own desk. The day unfolded like a strange waltz, avoiding glances, professional dialogue, the occasional light remark over revisions. They behaved like responsible adults, as if last night had been nothing but a late meeting, as if the look he'd given her outside her door had been a trick of the street lamp. Neither of them believed it. By late afternoon, the office had emptied. Lucille stayed behind, racing to finish a detailed report, hoping to avoid overtime. Lucille, his voice came from the doorway. She turned. Bo leaned against the frame, 2 paper cups in hand. I figured you skipped your afternoon coffee. She meant to refuse, but somehow she found herself standing, walking towards him. They stepped out onto the balcony, rarely used, quiet enough to hear the wind slipping through the walls, high enough to watch the city glittering under the fading light. Iced coffee, he said, passing her the one with the green lid. Less sugar, right? She blinked. You remembered. I pay attention. Lucille said nothing, only took a sip. After a pause, he asked, why did you choose to be an architect? She looked down at the streets below. Because I wanted to create something that made people feel. They had somewhere to return to. Bo nodded as if the answer touched something hidden in him. And you, she asked, why finance? At first because it was easy, then because I was good at it. Now, Because I don't know how to do anything else. And does it make you happy? He didn't answer right away. A soft wind lifted strands of her hair across her cheek. I suppose I've never really asked myself that. Lucille turned toward him. For a moment, the icy surface cracked, and she saw the man beneath it all. Not the CEO, not the investor, but someone searching for something more real than contracts and numbers. Maybe you should ask, she said gently. His gaze lingered on her steady and unflinching. Maybe you're the one making me start to... Her heart skipped hard and sharp. That evening near 8, Lucille gathered her things. Beau was still at his desk, lamplight throwing half his face into shadow, half into gold. You're not heading home, she asked as she passed. Are you free tomorrow night? He asked, blunt as ever. Dan des store spinstracies. For work. For a better reason. She hesitated. She could say no, could invent an excuse, but she was tired of pretending she hadn't been waiting for this. Where would you take me? Somewhere without plans. No files, no schedules. She narrowed her eyes, half wary, half intrigued. Anywhere's fine, as long as it's not a place with candles on the table. Beau laughed, his first unguarded laugh all day. Deal. They ended up at a summer fair on the city's edge. No chandeliers, no velvet chairs, only strings of glowing bulbs over food stalls, the smell of caramel and popcorn, children's laughter, and a crackling speaker playing a country song half out of tune. Lucille glanced around incredulous. Beau Donovan! Here! Beau Donovan was once a boy who loved toy trains, he said, nodding toward the small red roller coaster. Okem oorstepuis psikprikidbind. She laughed. I don't believe you. Want to bet? They climbed into a tiny carriage, shoulders pressed together in the cramped space. The ride jolted forward, winding through silly curves and flashing lights. And somewhere between the rattling turns and bursts of laughter around them, Lucille realized she was laughing too. Truly laughing. Not politely, not to hide anything, just because joy had arrived uninvited and unstoppable. And for a fleeting moment when Beau turned to her beneath the shimmer of carnival lights, she wasn't afraid anymore. Not of being misunderstood, not of being hurt. Only of this that if she let the feeling slip away, she might never find it again. The city woke under a pale sky washed with the damp scent of grass and the last drops of early rain clinging to window ledges. Lucille arrived at the office earlier than usual, coffee steaming in her hand, her heart still buoyed by the lightness of the night before. She had laughed. She had sat on a child's roller coaster beneath strings of carnival lights. And Beau Donovan, the man the world called a machine without feeling, had laughed so hard he nearly choked on cotton candy. Had it really happened? She hadn't yet answered herself when the boardroom door swung open. Beau was already there. His eyes brushed hers for a single second, just long enough to ignite all the questions she wasn't ready to face. Good morning, he said, voice wrapped in habit. Morning, she replied, feigning calm. The hours unfolded in phone calls and notes, professional exchanges, and unspoken glances. They said nothing private yet. Each time they passed in the hallway, Lucille felt that something had shifted. It wasn't teasing anymore. It wasn't fleeting curiosity. It was something serious. And that was the most frightening part of all. By evening, as colleagues trickled away, Lucille lingered shuffling designs into neat folders, keeping her hands busy so her mind wouldn't wander to those eyes. Eyes that seemed to dismantle every wall she built. Lucille. She spun. He was closer this time, not standing at the door. Too close. We need to talk, he said. She swallowed. About what's happening between us. She stepped back as though space could grant composure. Beau, we work together. Whatever this is, it shouldn't continue. He didn't argue. He only looked at her. And when he spoke, his voice was low, stripped of pretense. You can tell me you feel nothing. I'll believe you, but only if you look me in the eye. Her fists tightened. You're putting me in an unfair position. Unfair, he said. Steady now is pretending every day that I'm not thinking of you. Unfair is spending a lifetime mastering the art of restraint, only for one look from you to undo me. Lucille closed her eyes. Her heart hammered like it was knocking on a door she had ignored too long. Beau, this is wrong. Why? Because if it were wrong, she whispered, then walking away would be easier. Silence stretched. He stepped closer, not touching careful, but near enough to draw the air from her lungs. What if I weren't the investor in this project? Her eyes flew open. What are you saying? If I pull out, Transfer the shares? I'd no longer be the reason you feel you must keep your distance. You can't do that. I can't, and I will. For what? For me. For the chance to know if this is real, or just something you're too afraid to face. Lucille turned her head away dizzy at the thought of a man willing to walk away from millions just to erase her excuse. You're insane, she murmured. Beau's smile was faint tinged with sorrow. Maybe. But you're the only madness in my life I don't want cured. Something tugged at her heart, drawing it forward even as her body leaned back. Are you sure, she asked, more sure than I've ever been. The space between them was no longer distance. It was choice. On one side, safety, predictability, dreamless sleep. On the other, the man who could unsteady her with a glance, who made every boundary she'd built look fragile as smoke. Lucille drew in a breath, then nodded softly. Then, if you withdraw from the project, I'll have no reason left to run. Beau smiled, one hand slipping into his pocket, the other lifting slightly before pausing midair, never touching. No reasons, he said gently, only you. Lucille stepped back, not to escape, but to breathe, to feel, to believe. Then she turned away, her voice barely more than a breeze. I need time, and Beau didn't stop her. He only stood there, like an unlocked door, waiting for her to return by choice, not by chance. The city at night was usually a riot of light, a celebration on every corner. Tonight it felt hushed, as if someone had asked the bulbs to keep their voices low. Lucille wandered the small streets around her block without calling a cab, or opening a map, walking as though she were searching for something she couldn't yet name. The night wind was cool and sharp, sliding over her skin like an invisible hand made of memory. Every image of her conversation with Beau replayed in her head, his low voice stripped of armor, the way he would not look away, and the sentence that still made her heart trip. I can withdraw. She had believed Beau to be the sort of man who never stepped back. Perhaps he had been. But now he stood willing to let go of what he held simply to wait for something that might never arrive. And that, more than anything, shook every guard she had built down to its foundations. The next morning, she took the day off. A short message to Evelyn, then she faced the phone down on the table like a door she didn't want to open. She needed to think, to feel, to admit that whatever stirred inside her was not a passing flutter, not childish excitement, not a grown-up game of hide and seek. It was real, and that terrifies you more than any budget meeting ever could. She sat in the tiny cafe on the corner, the one she loved when she was a student, ordered a cappuccino, and let time slide like a drop of milk around the rim. Love had once been an extravagance to her, a door closed too soon, a small flame that warmed but rarely burned. Beau was different. He hadn't come merely to make her feel something. He'd come to make her confront herself. And the frightening truth was, she wanted to believe him. That afternoon, rain began to fall as she reached home, a fine mist not heavy, but enough to draw the city inward and fold people into themselves. She climbed the stairs slowly, leaving the hallway lights off, moving like someone stepping into a story without yet knowing the ending. When she opened her door, her heart nearly stopped. Beau Donovan stood on her doorstep, lightly wet from the rain hands in his pockets, eyes steady, as if he had been waiting there a long while. What are you doing here? She asked, softer than she meant to be. Waiting for you, he said simply. Her fingers tightened around her keys. I told you I needed time. You've had time, he replied without rush, without pressure. Now I need a word. She looked at him, not the suited man from boardroom photos, but an ordinary man standing before the door, to her heart offering not his power or his reason, but his own fragile honesty. Why me, Beau? She asked, almost a confession. He stepped closer, close enough for her to feel his breath stitch into her own. Because when you came into my life, awkward late hair a mess and eyes wide, you made me realize for the first time I didn't want to be in control anymore. Lucille laughed, a tiny trembling sound that brimmed with near tears. You scare me, she whispered. I know, he said, but I'm here, not to force you to believe, to stay if you allow me. For a moment, the world outside dropped away. No cars, no rain, no past. Only two people, one waiting sentence, and a door that had not been shut. She inhaled deeply. If I step forward, Beau, this won't be a game. He nodded. I have never been jocular about this. She looked at him, looked truly, and then slowly opened the door. Come in. I'm tired of standing outside." He needed no more words. He stepped across the threshold. The space between them closed with a fingertip touch, gentle, unhurried, sure. And Lucille knew in the softest corner of herself that from that moment on, she would not step back. Falling in love was never something Lucille had planned. Falling in love with Beau Donovan, even less so. Their feelings didn't resemble a song with a clear melody. They were more like the lingering hum of an old piano, sometimes out of tune, yet making her heart pause just to listen. In the days that followed, they became like two planets, once colliding in a strange orbit, now circling each other carefully, gently. By day they wore professionalism like armor. No lingering touches, no stolen glances, only clipped emails, scheduled meetings, and measured voices. But by night, when the city hushed and the dark blurred the lines between strangers and something more, they were themselves. Some evenings Beau arrived at her apartment carrying toast and canned soup, declaring, "I once learned to cook, but forgot sometime around 25. Lucille had laughed, replying, "Lucky you're rich," and they'd laughed so hard, neither could hold their spoon straight. Neither said it aloud, but they both knew they were balancing on a tightrope between reason and emotion. And for the first time in her life, Lucille no longer wanted reason to win. One late evening, after reviewing the final designs for Richmond Tower, Lucille rose from the table and stepped onto the balcony where the glow of the street lamp slipped through the curtains. She folded her arms across her chest and gazed at the sleeping city below. Her shoulders trembled, not with the chill, but with words unspoken. Beau joined her close, but not touching, standing in silence beside her. "Everything is happening too fast," she whispered. "We can slow down," he said, "only if you want to." She turned to him. "You once said you never let feelings take over, and now you're—" letting you. Beau finished, his voice low, unguarded, so true it caught in her throat. "Lucille, you've made me believe in something I never trusted all my youth, that feelings aren't weakness. They're the only thing that makes us honest." She had no reply, only the sting of tears in her eyes. Because in a world obsessed with appearances, to find someone willing to name his fear and call it love, such a man was worth believing in. But even the most beautiful stories have hairline cracks. On Monday morning, Lucille arrived early at the office. In the lobby, she found a circle of people whispering, voices sharp as needles. "Have you heard? Rumor is Beau Donovan pulled all his funding from Richmond Tower. So, the project's dead. Because the young architect is dating the investor, obvious." Lucille froze. She didn't need to ask who they meant. She straightened her back, walked past them with steady steps, though her heart was slipping out of place. Inside the meeting room, she closed the door, braced her hands on the table, not because she felt guilty, but because she felt exposed, as if the fragile love she had been holding with both hands had been thrust beneath the world's suspicion. That afternoon she called Beau. "They're talking," she said plainly. "I know. You pulled out because of me." "No," he replied. "I pulled out because I wanted fairness, because I don't want you to walk through this relationship as if over shards of glass." She was silent a long while, then whispered, "People will think I was favored. They'll think I was only ever a passing choice." His voice came steady, certain enough to leave her no room for doubt. "Lucille, I didn't invest in you. I chose to stay with you. Sometimes the tears that fall aren't born of heartbreak, but of hearing words you never believed you deserved." That night, Lucille stood before the mirror, wiping away makeup setting aside the whispers behind her back. She studied her reflection, not a perfect woman, not extraordinary, not powerful, but in her eyes, for the first time in years, something remained unshaken, the quiet light of belief. Not belief in Beau, but belief in this truth. Love does not come to break you. It comes so that at last you dare to be wholly yourself. That morning, the sky was clear, as if someone had wiped the air with a piece of jade silk. Lucille stood before the newly finished Richmond Tower, watching the panels of glass catch the sun like tiny mirrors pieced together from other people's dreams. She didn't know what to feel, pride, excitement, or simply a quiet gratitude that she hadn't given up. Beside her, Evelyn was whispering to a TV reporter, hands conducting the moment like a maestro. Lucille, in a simple cream linen dress, remained still. Not because she had nothing to say, but because some moments are best held in silence. Beau hadn't come to the opening. She'd expected that. He had kept his word, withdrawn from the project, stepped away from meetings, from the limelight, from the curious eyes. He'd given her space so she could step forward without being framed by whatever label the world might try to stick to her. And because of that, she missed him like a small, persistent ache. A week later, on an ordinary evening with no warning, the doorbell chimed. Lucille was folding a blanket hair damp from a recent wash. She opened the door unprepared. There he was. No flowers, no grand gestures, just a small slate blue box in his hands and a smile that unraveled all the carefully measured logic in her head. "You still think of me?" he said, less a question than a quiet fact he already knew. Lucille braced her hand on the doorframe, hiding the smile that rose up. "You're very confident," she said. "Not confident," he corrected, tilting his head. "Just, I still think of you. Every day." Her heart, hardened by meetings, deadlines, and endless expectations, found it impossible to resist that voice. She crossed her arms. "What's in the box?" He lifted it as if it weighed no more than a question. "Not a ring if you're worrying, but if you want, I'll come back in a few months." Lucille laughed, and in that laugh there was something that touched the bottom of her relief, forgiveness, readiness. "Come in," she said, "before I change my mind." In the warm glow of the living room, they sat on the floorbacks against the sofa, sharing ice cream and an old playlist. Beau placed the box on the table. "I thought a lot about how to end things," he said. "And then I realized, I don't want an ending. I want a beginning." Lucille watched him quietly. "You always say the right things at the right time," she teased. "No," he shook his head. "I've learned to listen to the right person." She opened the box. Inside was a tiny walnut model, a miniature Richmond tower, but with a new penthouse floor. "This," she breathed, "is the part you proposed." He finished. "Nobody approved it, but I kept it, because it was the most beautiful idea." Lucille looked at the rooftop in the model, a small glass garden with long benches and miniature trees, a place where people could sit inside the city and still find quiet. Like you both said, a pocket of calm in the noise. This time, Lucille had no words. She simply rested her head on his shoulder. Months later, on a gentle autumn afternoon, Beau Donovan knelt in the real garden atop the Richmond Tower. The very roof she had once sketched in a sleepless night, and which had now become real. There was no orchestra, no press, only the wind in her hair, lavender nodding at their feet, and one question. "Lucille Winters, will you continue building this dream with me for the rest of our lives?" She laughed between tears. "You always said you had no plan. Remember," she whispered through the salt, "so I'll make it for you. My plan is to say yes to you from today and for always." When he slid the ring onto her finger and a flock of birds carved a white arc across the blue, Lucille realized that nothing in life is perfect. But if someone dares to love you the way Beau Donovan loved her, with wholehearted devotion, with the courage to let go, with the patience to learn how to begin again, then that in itself is a miracle. A love that needs no reason, only the truth of itself. A year later, the glass garden on the top floor of Richmond Tower was still where Lucille went every Saturday morning. She carried a coffee cup, a sketchbook, and sometimes, if Beau wasn't tied up in meetings or experimenting with some ridiculous invention like a sliding sofa for the living room, he came too. No one spoke anymore of how she had once been the architect who dated the investor. They had proved without speeches or justifications that love, when nurtured with honesty, finds its own voice. On rainy afternoons, Beau would read aloud passages from old books he'd stumbled upon in secondhand shops, while she curled beside him, her legs draped across his, listening in silence as though it were a ritual crafted just for the two of them. They didn't live a perfect life. They still bickered about who left socks scattered in the bedroom, or who forgot to take out the rubbish. But in between the small annoyances, there were pauses, an unexpected hand slipping into hers. At work, a soft kiss brushed in passing through the kitchen, or a glance so warm it made the entire day feel complete. Lucille had once refused to believe in destiny, but now each time she stepped onto the balcony, coffee warming her palms, the city glittering beneath her, and Beau humming off-key in the kitchen, she thought, if this wasn't destiny, she wouldn't need anything more.